Before my sister's wedding, my parents gave me 8 conditions. Do all of them, and we will let you come. I smiled, booked a beach vacation to Malibu, and mailed one last gift. As my sister opened it in front of hundreds of guests, she screamed in terror. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. My name is Allison. I am 34 years old and a senior forensic accountant for a top Wall Street firm. Growing up, I was the designated scapegoat of our household. I was the plain, overly serious older sister entirely eclipsed by Isabella, the radiant golden child. While Isabella spent her youth demanding the spotlight and draining my parents' bank accounts to fund her lavish lifestyle, I kept my head down, studied relentlessly, and built a lucrative career entirely on my own merit. Despite my independence, my parents still treated me like a socially awkward burden, a dull pencil pusher they needed to hide away. Their blatant favoritism reached its absolute peak on a rainy Tuesday evening at one of the most exclusive steakhouses in downtown Chicago. My mother, Patricia, had summoned me for what she claimed was an important wedding planning meeting. She sat across from me in a tailored emerald suit, her posture rigidly perfect, nursing a glass of expensive white wine. Beside her, my father Howard was already on his second drink, looking at me with his usual mix of impatience and disdain. Isabella was conveniently absent. She was supposedly too busy finalizing details with her fiancé Trey. Trey was a highly respected African-American tech medical entrepreneur, hailing from a prominent, wealthy Chicago family. He was brilliant, grounded, and completely unaware of the toxic masquerade my family was running. Patricia reached into her designer handbag, her manicured fingernails catching the dim restaurant lighting. She pulled out a brightly colored, heavily laminated piece of paper and slapped it down onto the crisp white tablecloth. She slid it across the table until it stopped right next to my untouched water glass. "Read it," Patricia commanded, her voice sharp and slicing right through the gentle hum of the restaurant. "Read it out loud, Allison. If you cannot commit to every single word on that page, do not even think about showing your face at the wedding." I looked down at the laminated sheet. Bold, capitalized letters across the top read, "8 conditions for wedding attendance." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, but years of investigating financial fraud had taught me how to keep my expression entirely blank. I picked up the paper and began reading the unbelievable demands my own family had drafted. Condition 1. I read, my voice steady and measured. Allison will cover the complete floral invoice from Lumiere Flora, totaling $45,000 as her mandatory contribution to the bride. I looked up, meeting my mother's defiant glare. I continued down the list. Condition 3. Allison will wear a pre-approved dull gray knee-length dress and sit at table 29, located next to the kitchen corridor. This is to ensure she does not distract from the bride or ruin the aesthetic of the main family photographs. Howard leaned forward, pointing a thick finger at me. "Keep reading. Look at number 8. I dropped my gaze back to the laminated sheet. Condition 8. Allison must exit the reception immediately following the cake cutting. This is non-negotiable to prevent any of her typical awkward socializing from embarrassing the family in front of Trey's distinguished relatives." I gently placed the list back onto the table, aligning it perfectly parallel to the edge. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to finance a massive portion of the wedding dress like a shadow hide near the restrooms and leave before the real celebration began, all to protect the fake aristocratic image they were trying to sell to Trey's family. Patricia crossed her arms, a smug, expectant look on her face. "Do not look at me like that," she snapped. "We are protecting Isabella's big day. You have always been so stiff, so painfully boring. Trey's family is pure high society. They expect elegance. We cannot have a 34-year-old spinster accountant hovering around acting like a dark cloud and ruining the bridal party's vibe." Before I could respond, Howard slammed his open palm onto the table, rattling the silverware. He leaned in, his face flushed with unearned righteous anger. "And do not even think about complaining about the floral bill, Allison. You owe your sister this money. You owe this family." I raised an eyebrow. "I owe you $45,000 for flowers." "Yes, you do," Howard growled. You think I forgot I had to sell my pristine vintage Mustang to pay for your college tuition because you stubbornly refused to take out student loans like a normal person. You drained my accounts. Now it is payback time. You have a fancy corporate job, so you are going to write that check tomorrow morning. The air in the restaurant suddenly felt very still. For my entire life, they had rewritten history to make Isabella the victim and me the burden, but I was no longer a defenseless teenager seeking their approval. I was a professional investigator who dealt in hard facts and undeniable numbers. I picked up my white cloth napkin, slowly wiping the corners of my mouth, never once breaking eye contact with my father. I had a full academic scholarship to the university. Howard, I said, my voice dangerously calm and precise. Every single cent of my tuition, housing, and books was covered by the university because I graduated at the top of my class while Isabella was busy failing remedial math. Howard opened his mouth to argue, but I did not let him speak. You did not sell your vintage Mustang to pay for my education, I continued, my tone dropping to an icy whisper. You sold that car to pay off Isabella's massive credit card debt when she maxed out 3 different cards during her frivolous summer trip to Paris. She was 18, reckless, and about to be sued by the credit companies. You sold the car to save her from bankruptcy, not to send me to school. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her chest. How dare you speak to your father that way? We are giving you a chance to be part of this wedding. I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I dropped it directly onto the laminated list of demands. Keep your 8 conditions, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. That covers my sparkling water. I will not be attending the wedding, and I certainly will not be paying $45,000 for flowers. Howard stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You walk out that door, and you are dead to us, he threatened, his voice echoing slightly in the dining room. You will have nothing to do with this family. I looked at them both, feeling nothing but profound relief. Do not worry about me, I said, offering them a chilling, polite smile. I will be enjoying a peaceful vacation. But I promise I will mail Isabella a wedding gift, one she will never ever forget. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, my heels clicking confidently against the marble floor, leaving my parents speechless, furious, and completely unaware of the absolute destruction that was about to rain down on their lives. The heavy glass doors of my 50th floor Manhattan office swung open with a violent crash. Before my assistant could even stand up, Isabella was storming past the reception area, her designer heels sinking aggressively into the plush carpet. 2 building security guards were hot on her heels, their walkie-talkies buzzing with frantic static, but she ignored them completely. She marched straight into my glass-walled office, slamming her manicured hands down on my pristine mahogany desk. You made our mother cry, Isabella screamed, her face flushed with unhinged rage. The entire floor of senior analysts and forensic accountants stopped typing. The silence was deafening. You selfish, jealous brat. She is inconsolable right now because you refused to pay for my flowers. You are going to wire that $45,000 right this second, or I swear to God I will ruin your entire life. Ma'am, you need to step back immediately, one security guard warned, reaching out to grasp her arm. I raised a single hand, signaling the guards to stand down. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact with my sister. It is fine, Marcus, I said in a calm, measured voice. She will only be a minute. Isabella scoffed, flipping her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder and sneering at my tailored navy suit. You think you are so powerful sitting behind this big desk. You are just a boring bean counter, Allison. You sit in a dull cubicle all day looking at spreadsheets, while I am marrying into an absolute dynasty. Trey's family is pure Chicago royalty. Do you know what they would do if they found out my sister is a mentally unstable thief? A thief, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying with crystal clarity across the silent office floor. Yes, a thief, Isabella spat, leaning closer until I could smell her expensive perfume. You stole my peace of mind. You stole Mom and Dad's happiness. And if you do not pay for those flowers, I will tell Trey's mother that you stole money from Howard's business to pay for your fancy Wall Street wardrobe. Trey's family hates liars. They will ban you from the city, let alone the wedding. You will be a complete outcast. It was a fascinating, desperate threat. Isabella was projecting her own lifelong habits directly onto me. For years, she had secretly skimmed money from our father's business accounts to fund her luxury vacations and high-end shopping sprees. Now she was ready to use her own crimes as a fabricated weapon to destroy my reputation with a family she was desperately trying to impress. I did not raise my voice. I did not waste my breath defending myself against her absurd accusations. Instead, I turned my attention back to my dual monitors. My fingers began flying across the keyboard with practiced precision. As a senior forensic fraud investigator, I hunted hidden money for a living. I tracked down offshore accounts for billionaires and dismantled financial lies every single day. Isabella thought she was dealing with the helpless, jealous sister from her childhood. She completely forgot she was dealing with an apex predator in the financial world. "What are you doing?" she demanded, slapping her hand against the side of my monitor, her voice rising in pitch. "I am talking to you. You owe me that money. Dad said you have a duty to this family after everything they sacrificed for you." "They sacrificed nothing for me," I replied, my eyes scanning the data rapidly populating on my screen. "But let us talk about what you are doing for them, or rather what you are doing to them." I hit the enter key one final time and grabbed the edge of my monitor, swiveling it around so the glowing screen faced her directly. "What is this?" Isabella snapped, refusing to look closely at the spreadsheet. "This is the corporate registry for the state of Illinois," I explained, tapping a manicured nail against the screen. "You told Mom and Dad that the floral arrangements for your wedding would cost $45,000. You handed them a formal invoice from a company called Lumiere Flora." Isabella crossed her arms defiantly. "They are an exclusive high-end boutique. Trey's family uses them for all their massive charity galas. You would not understand luxury if it hit you in the face." "I understand basic public records," I countered smoothly, watching her bravado slip. "I just checked the corporate registry. Lumiere Flora is not an exclusive boutique. It is a shell company. It was registered exactly 3 weeks ago, and the sole proprietor listed on the business license is Chloe Jenkins." The blood drained from Isabella's face so fast she looked like she might pass out right there on my carpet. Her arms uncrossed, dropping limply to her sides. "Chloe Jenkins." I continued, savoring the absolute panic flashing in my sister's wide eyes. "Your old college roommate. The one who works as a freelance graphic designer. Why is your roommate running a high-end floral boutique? And more importantly, why did she file a wholesale purchase order yesterday for exactly $12,000 worth of generic wedding flowers?" Isabella opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked wildly at the security guards, suddenly very aware of the audience we had gathered. So I said, leaning forward and lowering my voice to a lethal pitch, "The actual wholesale flower cost is only $12,000. You charged Mom and Dad $45,000. Where is the rest of the money going, Isabella? What exactly are you doing with the extra $33,000? "You are crazy," Isabella stammered, taking a large step back. Her previous arrogance had completely vanished, replaced by the frantic, terrified energy of a cornered animal. "You are making things up. You hacked into something. That is highly illegal. Public business records are free for anyone to search," I said calmly. "Do you want to call Mom and Dad right now and explain your little markup? Or should we conference Trey in? I am sure his aristocratic family would love to hear how the beautiful bride is scamming her own parents to line her pockets before the honeymoon even begins." "You stay away from Trey," she hissed, her voice trembling with genuine terror. "If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will destroy you. I will make sure Dad cuts you out of everything. He already has," I reminded her. "Marcus, please escort my sister to the elevators. She was just leaving." Isabella shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. She spun around on her designer heels and sprinted out of the glass office, nearly colliding with a paralegal on her way to the elevator bank. The security guards followed closely behind her. I watched the elevator doors slide shut, cutting off her panicked escape. I slowly turned my monitor back around, staring at the shell company registration. Stealing $33,000 from our parents was petty theft by her standards. There was something much bigger going on here, and I was going to follow the money until the whole rotten foundation collapsed. The elevator doors had barely sealed shut before I spun my chair back to my dual monitors, my heart beat with a steady, rhythmic precision. Isabella thought she had covered her tracks with a few fake invoices and a screaming match, but she fundamentally misunderstood the nature of digital footprints. Money never actually disappears. It simply changes shape. I cracked my knuckles and opened my secure encrypted database. I had clearance to access international wire registries, corporate tax filings, and nonprofit disclosure forms. My clearance level was one of the highest in the building, granted only to senior investigators who handled cases involving nine-figure sums. I bypassed the standard firewall and typed in the exact legal name of the philanthropic medical foundation owned by Trey and his family, the Thornton Medical Youth Initiative. Isabella had bragged incessantly for the past 6 months about her new role there as their lead volunteer event coordinator. She claimed she was doing it out of the goodness of her heart, organizing galas to fund pediatric research. I knew my sister better than anyone on this planet. Isabella did not do anything unless it came with a direct deposit, a designer label, or an opportunity to elevate her social status. I pulled up the charity tax filings and vendor expense reports from the state portal. As the complex spreadsheets populated across my screen, I could perfectly hear my father and his booming voice from our last agonizing Thanksgiving dinner. He had stood at the head of the dining table holding a crystal glass of scotch he could no longer afford boasting loudly to our captive extended family. Isabella is marrying into an absolute dynasty, Howard had proclaimed, his chest puffed out with unearned pride. The Thornton family is old Chicago money. This union secures our family legacy permanently. We are merging two great empires. It was a complete and utter fabrication. Our family empire was nothing more than a fragile house of cards built on maxed-out lines of credit and secretly leveraged second mortgages. His commercial real estate firm had not turned a single cent of profit in over 4 years. Patricia was quietly pawning her original diamond jewelry and buying cheap replicas to maintain her pristine country club image. They desperately needed massive wealth to save them from total financial ruin. But what I was looking at right now proved they were not just waiting for a wedding to access that wealth. They were already actively draining the vault. I cross-referenced the outbound payment ledgers with the newly registered shell company I had already identified. The $12,000 wholesale flower cost and the $45,000 charge to my parents were just the tip of a massive rotting iceberg. I found a wire transfer from the youth charity to Lumiere Flora for $80,000 logged under a line item for spring gala floral decor. Then I found another transfer submitted 3 weeks later for $95,000. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes rapidly scanning the payee columns for matching anomalies. Lumiere Flora was not acting alone. There were 5 other recently incorporated vendors listed on the charity expense sheets: Summit Elite Catering, Vanguard Event Logistics, Horizon Medical Outreach. All of them had received massive 6-figure payouts from the charity over the past 5 months for services that were entirely vaguely described. I pulled the corporate filings for every single one of those vendors. All of them were registered to the exact same obscure registered agent address in a commercial park in Delaware. I ran a deep skip trace on the Delaware address using tracking software. The web of deceit routed directly back to a limited liability holding company completely controlled by my father. My breath caught in my throat as the sheer scale of the deception materialized before my eyes. This was not a greedy bride overcharging her parents for a lavish wedding to pocket some extra spending money. This was a highly coordinated, incredibly brazen embezzlement ring. Howard and Patricia were using the prestigious volunteer position as a direct backdoor into the Thornton family charity. They were generating completely fake invoices for youth medical events that never actually happened, approving the massive payouts through authorized coordinator credentials, and routing the tax-free cash right into their own pockets. I opened a new tracking window and started running the specific routing numbers through an international financial tracking portal. The stolen funds did not stay in that Delaware holding company for more than 24 hours. They were being bounced through a series of rapid-fire digital transfers, washed cleanly through a blind holding account in the Cayman Islands, and then quietly deposited back into failing business operating accounts and private wealth management funds. Every single transaction was meticulously timed to avoid standard banking alert thresholds. They thought they were untouchable because they were dealing with charitable funds that usually fly under the radar until an annual audit. I dragged my mouse across the final column of the spreadsheet, selecting every fraudulent transaction processed since Isabella accepted her volunteer position. I clicked the auto sum function and waited for the system to calculate the total diverted funds. A bold red number suddenly flashed across my high-definition monitor, brightly illuminating my otherwise darkened corner office. The total deficit was $2,487,000. That was nearly $2.5 million, systematically stolen directly from innocent sick children to fund an aristocratic lifestyle and a sham wedding. My parents had handed me a laminated list of 8 humiliating conditions to attend a ceremony funded entirely by federal felonies. They wanted me to sit silently in the shadows so I would not ruin their perfect illusion. I slowly reached for my cell phone and pulled up direct contact information for Trey. It was time to step out of the shadows and show the groom exactly who he was marrying. The flight to Chicago gave me 2 hours to organize the financial execution of my family. I stepped out of the cold wind on Michigan Avenue and walked into a high-end coffee roaster. The ambient noise created the ideal cover. I selected a quiet corner booth perfect for dismantling a marriage. I ordered black coffee and waited. Trey walked in 10 minutes later. I recognized him from the perfectly curated engagement photos Isabella had been forcing onto social media feeds to secure her high society image. Trey exuded the quiet confidence of old money. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat and carried an expensive leather briefcase. He scanned the room, his eyes locking onto mine with a mixture of polite restraint and deep caution. He did not offer a hug or even a polite handshake as he slid into the leather booth across from me. He unbuttoned his coat, leaning back and studying me with sharp, analytical eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Trey," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "I know this is highly unusual." "Unusual is a polite word for it, Allison," he replied. His voice was smooth, but layered with frost. "Isabella was quite distressed when I told her you reached out to me directly. She explicitly asked me not to come." "I am sure she did." Trey let out a short, humorless breath, crossing his arms tightly over his broad chest. "Look, I am a very direct person, so I will get straight to the point. Isabella warned me you might try to pull a stunt like this. She told me you have been struggling lately. She said you might try to cause a massive scene to disrupt the wedding out of spite." I took a slow, deep sip of my hot black coffee, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second. A stunt. That is an interesting choice of words. What exactly did she tell you I was going to do? Trey sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose like a man dealing with a nuisance he did not have time for. "She told me how hard it was for you growing up and always living in her shadow. She mentioned your ongoing jealousy issues regarding her relationship with your parents. She even warned me that you have a history of fabricating lies to get attention because you are unhappy with your own life. I am only here because I respect family bonds, and I wanted to extend the courtesy of hearing you out before I ask you to cease all contact with us." I nodded slowly. The manipulation was so textbook it was almost boring. Isabella had proactively painted me as a bitter, unstable spinster to immunize Trey against any truth I might try to share. It was a decent defense mechanism, assuming she was dealing with someone who relied on emotion. But I did not deal in emotion or family sentiment. I dealt in mathematics. I did not argue with him. I did not defend my character or launch into a tearful explanation of how my parents had mistreated me. Emotional pleas are for amateurs. Instead, I reached down into my leather briefcase and pulled out the evidence. "Trey, I understand why you believe that narrative," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, clinical register. "If I were marrying someone, I would want to believe the best about them too. But I am not here to discuss my childhood, my relationship with my parents, or my sister and her wedding dress. I pulled out a thick black leather-bound audit file. It landed on the marble table with a heavy, authoritative thud. I rested my hand on top of it, locking my eyes entirely on his. I am not here as the jealous sister Trey. I stated, my tone razor-sharp and absolutely unwavering. I am here as a senior forensic fraud investigator for a top-tier Wall Street financial firm, and I strongly suggest you drop the protective fiancé routine and switch into the mindset of a corporate executive protecting his assets. Trey blinked, his protective posture faltering for a split second. The confident dismissal in his eyes gave way to a flicker of genuine confusion. A forensic fraud investigator. Isabella said you were a low-level accountant. She said you just processed payroll. I smiled a cold, humorless smile. Isabella says a lot of things. Most of them are carefully constructed fictions designed to separate wealthy people from their money. I slid the thick black leather file across the smooth marble table until it bumped gently against his expensive white porcelain coffee cup. Trey looked down at the file, then back up at me, his jaw tightening. What exactly is this? This is a comprehensive, fully documented financial audit of the Thornton Medical Youth Initiative, I explained, watching his eyes widen at the mention of his mother and her prized charity. Over the past 72 hours, I have traced every single outbound vendor, payment your foundation has made, since Isabella graciously volunteered to step in as your lead event coordinator. Trey sat perfectly still. His hands remained flat on the table, refusing to touch the folder. You audited my family charity. How did you even get access to those records? Public tax filings cross-referenced with vendor registration databases and offshore routing numbers. I replied without missing a single beat. The access is perfectly legal. The illegal activity happening inside those accounts is not. He stared at me, the tension in the booth thickening to the point it was hard to breathe. The protective barrier he had built around Isabella was fracturing under the weight of my absolute certainty. He slowly reached out his fingers, brushing the edge of the leather cover. Open it, I commanded softly. Turn to page 4 right now, and look at what your future wife and my parents are doing to your family youth charity. Trey stared at the heavy leather cover for a fraction of a second before his manicured fingers flipped it open. He turned directly to page 4, just as I had instructed. I sat back in the plush leather booth, taking a slow sip of my black coffee, and watched the transformation happen in real time. The polite, guarded fiancé who had walked into this coffee shop, ready to dismiss a jealous sister, vanished entirely. In his place, the sharp, protective corporate businessman emerged. His eyes darted across the highlighted bank statements, the shell company registration certificates, and the meticulously logged offshore wire transfers. The ambient hum of the espresso machines and the soft jazz playing through the overhead speakers seemed to fade away as the gravity of the financial data anchored him to the table. He traced a line of numbers with his index finger, his jaw tightening so fiercely I could see the muscle pulsing beneath his skin. He flipped to page 5, then page 6, his breathing growing shallow and measured. The documents left absolutely no room for interpretation or emotional defense. They were undeniable mathematical proof of a staggering betrayal. I had structured the audit file perfectly, designing it specifically for a man accustomed to reviewing high-level corporate briefs. Section 1 detailed the creation of Lumiere Flora and the other 5 fictitious vendors, complete with the Delaware registration stamps and the matching obscure corporate addresses. Section 2 contained the digital authorization logs from the Thornton Medical Youth Initiative, highlighting every single instance where Isabella had used her volunteer coordinator credentials to approve fake invoices for completely fabricated charity galas. Section 3 tracked the money, illustrating the exact offshore routing map my father had constructed to wash the stolen funds through the Cayman Islands before depositing them back into his failing business accounts. Trey did not say a single word for 4 agonizing minutes. He slowly read every single page, closely examining the forged signature logs and the time-stamped wire transfers. His face lost all its color, replaced by a cold, hardened mask of pure fury. Trey grips the table furious. She told me her parents were covering the entire wedding because they were old money aristocrats. They're paying for this wedding using my mother's charity fund. I met his furious gaze without blinking. They are paying for your wedding, your floral arrangements, their own delinquent mortgages, and Isabella's luxury designer wardrobe using your mother's charity fund. I corrected smoothly. My parents are not old money aristocrats. They are effectively bankrupt. My father's commercial real estate firm has not turned a legitimate profit in 4 years. They saw your family's philanthropic foundation as an unguarded vault, and they utilized Isabella to pry the door wide open. The $2.5 million missing from the youth initiative is currently keeping my parents out of federal bankruptcy court. Trey leaned back against the booth, letting out a sharp, bitter exhale. The realization of how deeply he had been manipulated settled over him like a heavy iron mantle. He ran a hand through his hair, the polished high society facade completely shattered by the sheer audacity of the crime. "I brought her into my home," he muttered, the anger vibrating through every syllable. "I introduced her to my mother. I gave her administrative access to our philanthropic accounts because she claimed she wanted to dedicate her life to helping sick children. It was all a calculated performance, a coordinated infiltration. It was an exceptionally executed financial extraction. I stated factually, keeping my emotions completely detached from the analysis. Isabella knew exactly what she was doing when she targeted you, Trey. She identified your family's wealth, isolated the most vulnerable access point through the charity, and executed a sustained embezzlement campaign under the guise of wedding planning and volunteer coordination. The offshore routing structure my father established proves this was premeditated long before the engagement ring ever went on her finger. They did not just stumble into a momentary lapse of judgment. They built a systematic pipeline to drain your assets. You have to understand the mentality of people like my parents. I continued, my voice steady and completely devoid of any familial warmth. They do not view relationships as bonds. They view them strictly as acquisitions. When Isabella secured your proposal, they did not see a daughter finding happiness. They saw a permanent golden ticket to erase decades of their own terrible financial blunders. They needed a massive injection of untraceable capital, and your mother's dedication to helping sick children provided the perfect camouflage. By funneling those donations through ghost vendors, they created an invisible salary for themselves, subsidized completely by your family's generosity. Isabella has been playing the part of the devoted future wife flawlessly, but her real full-time job is managing the theft. They assumed no one would ever dare question the radiant bride. They assumed their aristocratic illusion was utterly impenetrable. They assumed wrong. Trey picked up his coffee cup, but his hand was shaking with suppressed rage, and he set it back down on the saucer with a sharp clatter. He stared at the black leather folder, processing the absolute destruction of his impending marriage. He looked up at me, his eyes cold and calculating, shifting from the evidence to the messenger who had delivered it. He studied my tailored suit, my calm demeanor, and the complete lack of sorrow on my face. He realized I possessed the exact same ruthless nature that he utilized daily to dominate the cutthroat business world. Trey looks up at Allison, his eyes cold. "Why show me this? They are your blood." Allison smiles slightly. "Because yesterday they handed me a list of 8 rules to attend this wedding, demanding I shrink myself so I wouldn't embarrass them. I prefer to burn the building down. Do you want to cancel the wedding now, or do you want to set a trap?" Trey closes the file. "We set a trap. We set a wall." Trey declared this was a trap, and I did not waste any time gloating or hesitating. We immediately got to work. If we were going to expose an embezzlement ring operating under the guise of wedding planning, we needed to make them believe they had won. They needed to feel completely secure in their arrogant superiority. I pulled my laptop from my briefcase and opened my personal banking portal. The first phase of the trap required bait, and I had exactly $45,000 ready to deploy. Trey watched in absolute silence as I initiated a direct wire transfer to my father and his primary business account. I typed out the specific reference note Isabella had demanded, but I layered it with the exact language of submission they expected from me. I accept the conditions. I will stay away. Here's the flower money to keep the peace. I hit send. The confirmation screen flashed green, signaling the irreversible movement of funds. I closed the laptop with a sharp click. It was a steep price for admission into their psychological stronghold, but as an investigator, I considered it a necessary operational expense. They thought they had just bullied their scapegoat into financing their floral arrangements. They had absolutely no idea they had just accepted a tracked documented wire transfer from a senior forensic accountant actively investigating them for federal charity fraud. This was not a petty family feud anymore. This was a calculated sting operation designed to completely dismantle their fabricated reality permanently. It did not take long for the bait to work. Less than an hour after Trey and I relocated to my secure office suite to outline our strategy, my cell phone vibrated on the glass conference table. The caller ID displayed Howard Wilson. I did not answer. I let it ring through to the automated system, watching the digital indicator transition from an incoming call to a recorded message. I placed the phone in the center of the table and pressed the speaker icon. Howard and his voice boomed through the quiet room, dripping with an unbearable cocktail of smug satisfaction and parental condescension. "Allison, I see the wire transfer cleared," he stated, his tone heavy with arrogant triumph. "It is about time you stepped up and contributed to this family without pitching a jealous fit. Your mother and I are glad you finally understand your place in all of this. Isabella deserves a perfect wedding, and quite frankly, your presence would have just been a dark cloud over the entire weekend. We accept your decision to stay away. Do not try to contact your sister again before the ceremony. She is far too busy dealing with important matters to manage your emotional baggage." He disconnected with a sharp click. The silence that followed in my office was profound. I did not look away from the phone. I slowly lifted my gaze to meet Trey and his eyes. He sat perfectly rigid across the table, his knuckles turning white where his hands gripped the leather arms of his chair. Any lingering fragment of doubt he might have harbored about my motives evaporated completely in the wake of that vile recording. He had just heard the raw, unfiltered toxicity of the Wilson family dynamic laid bare. Isabella had spent months spinning a tragic tale of my supposed jealousy and instability, painting our parents as patient, long-suffering aristocrats dealing with a problematic daughter. That single voicemail shattered her entire, carefully constructed narrative. Trey saw the reality. He saw the cold, transactional nature of a father who viewed his child only as a compliant funding source. He heard the casual cruelty they employed to keep me isolated. It is one thing to read about financial fraud on a spreadsheet, but it is an entirely different experience to hear the architects of that fraud casually destroying their own daughter over the phone. Trey took a deep breath, the muscles in his jaw ticking. "I am so sorry, Allison," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "They do not just steal money, they steal dignity." I gave him a curt nod, appreciating his insight, but refusing to dwell on the emotional damage. "We do not need apologies," I replied. "We need accountability." The sheer magnitude of their deception required a precise, unyielding response. We were not merely stopping a wedding. We were protecting a vital charitable foundation from being permanently drained by unrepentant criminals who wore designer suits and fake smiles. Across the city, Isabella was undoubtedly celebrating her perceived victory, popping expensive champagne and bragging to our mother about how easily she had forced the boring accountant to surrender. They were blindly reveling in their successful extortion, entirely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was already beginning to collapse. I turned my monitor toward Trey, bringing up the administrative dashboard for his family foundation. It was his turn to execute the next maneuver. As the director of the Thornton Medical Youth Initiative, Trey had absolute authority over the financial compliance division. Under his strict direct orders, his corporate accountant drafted a highly specific communication. It was disguised as an automated routine audit notice, stripped of any personal tone or urgency. The email was scheduled to bypass the standard volunteer portals and land directly in Isabella and her personal inbox. The subject line was remarkably simple: Routine Compliance Request for First Quarter Event Logistics. The body of the email formally demanded the immediate submission of all corresponding physical receipts, vendor contracts, and finalized guest ledgers for the 5 charity galas she had supposedly coordinated over the past 4 months. Trey read over the draft one final time, his eyes cold and devoid of any lingering affection for the woman he had intended to marry. He reached out and pressed the send button. The automated audit request vanished into cyberspace, flying directly toward Isabella. The countdown had officially begun. They were trapped. There was absolutely no escape. The digital trap was set, and we did not have to wait long for the prey to take the bait. I sat beside Trey in my secure office, both watching the monitors illuminating the dim room. The left screen displayed the back-end administrative dashboard for the Thornton Medical Youth Initiative. The right screen monitored the active network traffic passing through the Foundation's servers. 9 minutes after Trey authorized the automated audit request, a sudden burst of activity spiked across our tracking graphs. "She opened it," Trey said, his voice dropping to a low, clinical whisper. I tracked the IP address pinging the server. It was registered to the luxury downtown condominium Trey had purchased for them to live in after the wedding. Isabella was home. The system logged her opening the email, then it logged her reading it again. 30 seconds later, the Foundation portal lit up like a Christmas tree. Isabella was frantically logging into the vendor management system. "Watch her cursor pathway," I instructed, pointing to the heat map tracking her movements in real time. "She is panicking." The digital footprint painted a vivid picture of absolute terror. Isabella clicked into the first quarter invoice folders, then backed out, then refreshed the page 3 times in rapid succession. She attempted to access the restricted administrative ledger, but her volunteer credentials blocked the entry. She tried to download the PDF summaries of the floral expenditures, canceled the download halfway through, and immediately navigated to the vendor creation portal. Her keystrokes were erratic, generating error codes as she hastily typed and deleted passwords. She was desperately searching for a backdoor to upload backdated receipts before the audit deadline triggered a full review. She realizes she cannot simply generate physical receipts for money that has already vanished offshore. I noted analyzing her chaotic navigation patterns. The compliance request demands matching bank records. She does not have them. What she has is a massive, gaping hole in your ledger, and absolutely no way to explain it to a forensic auditor. Trey leaned closer. His jaw clenched tight as he watched the woman he thought he loved scramble to hide her theft. "She is using the Foundation-issued encrypted mobile device to access the network," he stated, his eyes narrowing. "That device is hardwired into our corporate server for security compliance. It automatically logs and records any VoIP communications transmitted through our network portal. If she is making a call using the Foundation bandwidth, we can intercept the audio log directly from the server." "Pull it," I commanded. Trey executed a rapid sequence of administrative overrides, bypassing the standard privacy protocols with his executive clearance. A window popped open on the right monitor, displaying an active audio waveform. Isabella had bypassed her personal cell phone, likely assuming the Foundation network was more secure for a sensitive conversation. It was a fatal miscalculation. The audio cracked through the high-definition speakers. Isabella was hyperventilating, her voice shrill and completely stripped of its usual, curated elegance. "Mom, you need to answer me right now," Isabella gasped into the receiver. "Trey's accounting department just hit me with a first quarter audit notice. They want physical receipts and vendor contracts for the gala expenses. They want everything submitted by tomorrow morning." The line crackled for a second before Patricia's voice echoed through the room. My mother sounded annoyed that her afternoon celebration was being interrupted by administrative details. Isabella, calm down and stop acting like a hysterical amateur. Patricia snapped, her tone dripping with toxic arrogance. It is just a routine computer-generated email. Nobody is actually looking at your files. You are panicking over a machine. It is not just a machine, Mom. Isabella's voice pitched higher, bordering on tears. The system has locked my administrative privileges. I cannot upload the fake invoices we made last month. If Trey's accountants look at the raw data, they will see the $2.5 million we routed to Dad. I am going to prison. The wedding is going to be canceled. Trey sat completely paralyzed. Hearing the raw, undeniable truth from her own mouth was a distinctly different kind of agony than reading it on a spreadsheet. I kept my eyes locked on the audio waveform, waiting for the mother's response. Listen to me very carefully. Patricia screeched, the mask of the refined aristocrat violently ripped away to reveal the manipulator underneath. Just pull another $100,000 from the Youth Initiative Fund to cover the fake receipts. Trey is blindly in love with you. He won't check until after you're married, and his assets are yours. The recording captured Patricia's heavy sigh, followed by a cold, calculating instruction. You have the access. Use the shell company your father set up in Delaware. Wire the money to yourself, pay a local graphics firm to fabricate a flawless paper trail of receipts, and submit them to the accountants. Once that ring is on your finger and the marriage certificate is signed, half of his empire belongs to us anyway. He is a trusting fool. Exploit it. Do not call me again until it is fixed. The call ended. The dial tone hummed through my office like a flatline. Trey muted the speakers. He did not yell. He did not throw anything. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly evil, that it transcended ordinary anger. They view me as an ATM. Trey said, his voice devoid of emotion. I am nothing but a trusting fool to them. You were a trusting fiancé, I corrected, refusing to let him absorb their toxicity. But you are no longer trusting. And they are about to find out exactly how foolish they are. I pointed back to the left computer monitor. Isabella, pushed to the brink by her mother's demands, and the impending audit, was making a fatal, irreversible move. She was initiating an absolutely massive $500,000 wire transfer directly to a fake vendor. To authorize it, she digitally forged Trey's own personal signature. The digital alert materialized on the right monitor as a pulsing crimson banner. Unauthorized high-level authorization detected. I kept my posture rigid as the software isolated the transaction. Isabella had just initiated a wire transfer for $500,000. The destination was an obscure limited liability company, registered to a vacant storefront in Delaware, the shell entity my father set up to launder real estate capital. To bypass the security protocols for a transfer of this magnitude, dual authentication was mandatory. Isabella possessed the first key through her administrative access. The second key required the executive director. We watched the screen in silence as a progress bar appeared. The system verified the secondary credential. A digital rendering of Trey and his personal signature populated the authorization field. The cryptographic timestamp stamped the document, locking the approval into the permanent logs. Trey let out a slow breath. His eyes tracked the green confirmation text that replaced the crimson warning. Transfer initiated, pending bank clearance. He leaned forward, bracing his elbows on the polished mahogany desk, his face bathed in the light of the monitors. The heartbreak that briefly softened his features during the phone intercept was gone. It was replaced by a hollow, terrifying calm. He was watching the woman he planned to marry commit federal wire fraud in real time. I documented the transaction instantly. My fingers flew across the keyboard, capturing the IP address, the media access control address of her issued device, the encrypted timestamp, and the exact vector of the digital forgery. I compiled the data packet into an immutable forensic ledger. She did not just type your name, I stated, breaking the heavy silence. She duplicated your encrypted digital token. That requires accessing your personal hardware. She copied your secure keychain from your laptop at the condominium. Trey turned his chair slightly, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office. The sprawling city skyline stretched out below us, a testament to the wealth and influence his family wielded. He rubbed his jaw, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "My parents did not inherit this view, Allison," he said, his tone carrying the weight of generational struggle. "They built this entire empire from a single desk in a damp basement in Queens. My father worked 90-hour weeks. My mother managed the books at night while raising 3 children. They faced relentless discrimination from banking institutions that refused to lend to them and from competitors who tried to crush them. They bled for every dollar in those accounts. They created the Youth Initiative because they remembered feeling powerless and unable to afford medical care." He turned back to the monitors, his eyes locking onto the fraudulent transfer confirmation. He pointed a steady finger at the screen. That money was earmarked for a pediatric oncology wing at the hospital. Isabella is stealing from dying kids to cover her mother and her vanity purchases. She is using the trust I gave her to loot my family legacy. My mother will not let this slide. I nodded, understanding the shift in our operational parameters. We had moved past canceled engagements. We were operating in the domain of criminal prosecution and asset recovery. The Wilson family fundamentally miscalculated their target. They assumed the Thorntons were soft aristocrats who would rather bury a scandal than face public embarrassment. They failed to realize they were dealing with street fighters who wore tailored suits. "The forensic packet is complete." I confirmed, saving the encrypted file to a secure drive. "We possess the audio recording of Patricia directing the theft. We have the server logs proving Isabella executed the transaction from your shared residence. We hold the footprint of the forged executive authorization. The chain of evidence is flawless. Once the bank processes the wire, the crime moves from attempted fraud to fully executed federal wire fraud. We control the narrative." Trey straightened his posture, slipping his suit jacket back on. He adjusted his cuffs, his demeanor shifting into pure corporate warfare. "Call the bank. Put a hard freeze on the destination account, but let the transfer clear our end. I want the federal offense completed on paper. I want no room for a defense attorney to claim she made a clerical error. Let her hang herself completely." I picked up the landline on his desk to initiate the banking protocol. The tension in the room was absolute, a coiled spring ready to release. We had the trap set. Isabella was sitting in their condominium, breathing a massive sigh of relief, convinced she outsmarted an entire team of corporate accountants. She believed the fake receipts would arrive by morning, the money would vanish into my father and his offshore pipeline, and the wedding would proceed without a hitch. I dialed the direct extension for the fraud department at the primary banking institution. Before the first ring could even echo through the speakerphone, the heavy oak doors of Trey and his executive office swung open with the force of a battering ram. I froze, the phone still pressed tightly to my right ear. Trey stood up immediately, buttoning his suit jacket. Diane Thornton stepped into the room. She was a fierce, elegant powerhouse of a woman radiating absolute authority. She wore a pristine white tailored suit, her posture rigid, her eyes blazing with an intense calculating fire. As a founding board member of the charity and the matriarch of the Thornton Empire, she commanded the space effortlessly. She did not bother with pleasantries. She bypassed the seating area entirely and marched straight toward the executive desk, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She looked directly at Trey, her expression entirely unyielding and cold, before her sharp analytical gaze shifted over to me. "The bank just called me about a $500,000 discrepancy," Diane demanded, her voice cutting through the quiet room like shattered glass. "Someone want to tell me what my future daughter-in-law is doing?" Diane Thornton did not wait for an invitation to take control. She stood framed in the doorway, her presence commanding every ounce of oxygen in the suite. I slowly lowered the telephone receiver from my ear, keeping my expression perfectly neutral as I ended the call to the fraud department. The freeze on the destination account was secure, but the primary threat was standing right in front of us. Trey cleared his throat, stepping out from behind his desk. He did not flinch under his mother's intense scrutiny. "Mother," he began, his voice tight. This is Allison, Isabella's sister. Diane's eyes narrowed. The temperature plummeted. She scrutinized me from head to toe, taking in my tailored suit and unbothered posture. She recognized the connection instantly, her suspicion palpable. Isabella's sister. Diane repeated the words, tasting sour. She crossed her arms. And why exactly is the sister of the woman currently attempting to siphon $500,000 out of my foundation, standing behind my son's desk while he watches? Because she is the one who caught it, Trey answered simply. She is a senior forensic fraud investigator on Wall Street. Diane did not blink. She did not soften. She stepped closer to the monitors, her gaze shifting from Trey to me. I do not deal in family drama or sibling rivalries. I deal in facts. If you are here to protect her, you can leave right now. I have already dispatched my legal team to freeze every asset attached to her name. I am not here to protect her, I replied, matching her authority. I am here to ensure she never touches another cent of your money. The transfer was initiated exactly 12 minutes ago. We let the wire clear the servers to guarantee a federal charge, but I just placed a hard freeze on the receiving shell account. The money is secured, but that $500,000 is merely the final maneuver in a much larger scheme. Diane raised an eyebrow, her initial hostility fracturing to let in genuine curiosity. She approached the table where the audit file sat waiting. I did not wait for her permission to proceed. I opened the file. Over the past 4 months, Isabella has systematically embezzled $2.5 million from the Thornton Medical Youth Initiative. I stated, my voice clinical and precise. I slid the documented logs across the mahogany surface. She utilized your son's trust to establish 6 fictitious vendors. She authorized payments for charity galas that never existed. The funds were then routed through a Delaware LLC directly into offshore accounts controlled by my father. The final $500,000 transfer was initiated today because Trey's accounting department triggered an audit requiring physical receipts she does not possess. Diane picked up the leather-bound file. She did not rush. She reviewed the Delaware registration certificates, the digital authorization timestamps, and the offshore routing maps. I watched her process the exact same mathematical devastation Trey had experienced an hour earlier. However, Diane did not look heartbroken. She looked vindicated. She snapped the folder shut, the heavy sound echoing in the silent office. The suspicion in her eyes had completely vanished, replaced by profound, unadulterated respect. She looked at me truly, seeing the forensic brilliance of the trap I had laid. You built an airtight federal case against your own flesh and blood. Diane observed a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. You let her forge my son's signature to guarantee a maximum sentence. I merely provided the rope, I corrected smoothly. Isabella chose to tie the knot. Diane let out a sharp, dark laugh. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city, much like Trey had done minutes earlier. I knew there was something foul beneath that overly sweet exterior, she said, her voice laced with venom. From the moment she accepted the ring, she has been trying to force me out of the wedding planning. She smiled in my face while aggressively pushing me to the margins. She rejected every venue I suggested, claiming my taste was too urban and not classic enough for her family's aristocratic standards. Trey bristled at the words, but Diane held up a hand to stop him. It was veiled racism, plain and simple. Diane continued, turning back to face us. She looked at me and saw a self-made woman from Queens who did not fit her absurd, fabricated high society narrative. She thought she could insult my heritage while simultaneously stealing the money I built from nothing. She thought because I am a mother, I would be blinded by my son's happiness. She vastly underestimated my intelligence. She underestimated everyone, Trey said, walking over to stand beside his mother. I will call the authorities. We have the evidence. We can have her arrested at the condominium right now before she even realizes the transfer was frozen. Diane held up her hand again, her manicured fingers adorned with diamonds catching the light. She looked down at the black leather folder, then up at Trey and me. The predatory smile returned to her face, sharper and more terrifying than before. No, Diane said softly. "We do not call the police right now." Trey frowned. "Mother, she committed federal fraud. We cannot let her remain in my home." "We are not letting her remain anywhere," Diane replied, stepping back to the desk and resting her hands flat on the polished wood. She looked at Trey and me, her eyes burning with a brilliant, calculating fire. "We do not arrest her quietly in a private condominium. That is too easy. That allows her parents to spin a narrative of a misunderstanding. She wants a high society wedding on my dime. She wants to play the classic wealthy aristocrat in front of all my friends and colleagues. Fine. We give her exactly what she wants. We give her the biggest audience in Chicago, and then we drop the guillotine." 1 week before the grand spectacle was scheduled to consume the city, Isabella threw a bridal shower that rivaled a royal coronation. Diane Thornton had kept her word, playing the role of the graciously distant mother-in-law, perfectly funding the lavish afternoon tea at the Waldorf Astoria without attending, citing a sudden corporate obligation in London. This absence gave my mother, Patricia, absolute reign over the room. She glided between tables draped in imported silk, accepting compliments on her daughter's brilliant future while sipping vintage champagne. The room was packed with Chicago's elite women dripping in diamonds who knew nothing of the fraudulent foundation, bankrolling the very caviar they were consuming. Isabella sat at the center of it all, opening gifts wrapped in gold paper, her manicured hands tearing through velvet ribbons with practiced elegance. They were basking in their perceived victory. They had successfully bullied the problematic sister into silence, secured the Thornton fortune, and hidden the stolen $2.5 million behind fabricated floral invoices. In her state of arrogant triumph, Patricia could not resist twisting the knife one final time. She pulled her phone from her designer clutch, framing a perfect shot of Isabella surrounded by a mountain of expensive gifts, laughing with her bridesmaids. Patricia typed out a message with deliberate malice, her thumbs flying across the screen. "So glad you kept your promise to stay away. The air is so much cleaner without your negativity." She hit send, a smug smile spreading across her face as she slipped the phone back into her purse. She expected the text to trigger a spiral. She expected angry paragraphs, desperate pleas for validation, or the heavy, defeated silence of a daughter who had finally been broken. 1,000 miles away, my phone vibrated on the marble kitchen island of my pristine Manhattan apartment. I did not flinch. I did not drop the ceramic mug of dark roast coffee I was holding. I simply picked up the device, unlocked the screen, and stared at the image of my sister radiating fabricated joy. The sunlight streaming through my floor-to-ceiling windows caught the steam rising from my cup, illuminating the quiet sanctuary I had built entirely on my own. There were no fake smiles here. There was no need to perform for an audience of social climbers. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the bitter warmth grounding me in the present reality. Looking at Patricia's message, a genuine laugh escaped my lips, echoing against the quiet elegance of my living room. 5 years ago, that exact brand of gaslighting would have destroyed my entire week. I remembered sitting in a cramped dorm room, crying until my ribs ached, because Patricia had sent a similar photo of a family vacation to Europe they had conveniently forgotten to tell me about. I remembered the crippling anxiety of always feeling deficient, of believing their narrative that my lack of superficial charm made me a burden. They had spent a lifetime conditioning me to crave their approval, using my tears as a currency to buy their own superiority. They needed a scapegoat to feel flawless. But the woman holding the phone today was not the weeping college student they remembered. She was a senior forensic accountant who had spent the last week meticulously dismantling their entire financial existence with surgical precision. I walked over to my home office setup, my laptop screen glowing with the compiled evidence of their impending destruction. Over the past 7 days, Trey and Diane had given me unrestricted access to the Thornton Empire's back-end servers. I had not just tracked the $500,000 transfer, I had traced every single fraudulent invoice back to its origin. Isabella and Patricia thought they were dealing with oblivious victims. They never considered that the boring sister they banished had the power to subpoena bank records through her firm's legal division. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and pulled up the specific file labeled Lumiere Flora. This was the crown jewel of their deception. It was the vendor Isabella had used to siphon the massive $500,000 payment the day the audit notice went live. She had desperately needed a clean corporate entity to absorb the stolen funds, assuming a basic business registration would mask the money trail. It was a pathetic amateur mistake. She had panicked and used an address she trusted. I took a screenshot of the official Delaware corporate registry filing for Lumiere Flora. I highlighted the registered agent's name in bright yellow. It was not a prominent florist. It was Chloe Evans, Isabella's college roommate and current maid of honor, the exact same woman sitting to her right in the photo Patricia had just sent me. I cropped the image perfectly, ensuring the Chicago residential address linked to the LLC was crystal clear. It was the exact address of the apartment Patricia had rented for Chloe 2 years ago. I did not type a paragraph of rage. I did not engage with her toxic provocation about the air being cleaner. I simply attached the highlighted screenshot of the corporate filing to our text thread. Beneath the damning image of Chloe Evans listed as the sole proprietor of the fake floral company that had just committed federal wire fraud, I typed a single precise sentence. Make sure Chloe declares the $500,000 on her taxes. I hit send. I placed my phone face down on the marble counter and went back to drinking my coffee. The digital delivery confirmation chimed softly in the quiet apartment. Back at the Waldorf Astoria, Patricia felt her phone buzz inside her clutch. Still riding the high of her perceived dominance, she retrieved the device expecting a defensive wounded reply. She opened the message thread. Her eyes locked onto the highlighted yellow text of the official state document. She read the name. She read the address. She read my single sentence. The blood instantly drained from Patricia's face, leaving her pale and visibly trembling. The ambient noise of the lavish bridal shower, the clinking of champagne flutes, the polite laughter, the string quartet playing softly in the corner, all of it faded into a deafening, terrifying vacuum. She stared at the screen, her mind desperately trying to comprehend how the discarded, useless daughter had obtained highly classified corporate registry documents linking their theft directly to the maid of honor sitting inches away. Patricia looked up, her gaze fixing on Isabella, who was holding up a crystal vase for the photographer. The fabricated reality they had built was collapsing. Patricia's phone went completely silent. There was absolutely no response. I adjusted the volume on my headset. The audio feed from the lapel microphone pinned to Trey in his tuxedo jacket was crystal clear. Uninvited to the rehearsal dinner at the Chicago Botanic Garden, I had a front row seat. The background hum of classical violin painted a vivid picture of the aristocratic facade my family maintained. Patricia and Howard had decided to call my bluff regarding the Lumiere Flora text. They assumed I was an estranged sister lobbing empty threats, believing their sheer audacity could carry them across the finish line perfectly. Trey was delivering a masterclass in psychological warfare. He played the besotted groom flawlessly, displaying unwavering devotion. He guided Isabella through the sea of affluent relatives pressing kisses to her temple while she basked in the attention. She wore a designer silk gown, purchased with stolen foundation funds, completely oblivious that the man holding her hand had spent the week working with federal authorities to dismantle her life. I listened as Howard and Patricia cornered Trey and his relatives near the open bar. The Thorntons were old money. My parents possessed no such restraint. We are looking at acquiring a few more commercial properties in the upcoming fiscal year, Howard boasted loudly. Our vast real estate portfolio keeps us incredibly busy, but family always comes first. Patricia and I believe in building a legacy for Isabella. It takes ruthless business acumen to manage properties across multiple states, but you have to stay aggressive in this market. It was a pathetic performance. Their vast portfolio consisted of an over-leveraged house, a failing distribution center, and a fraudulent Delaware shell company used to launder stolen charity funds. I heard Diane Thornton respond, her tone dripping with polite venom. How fascinating, Howard, Diane purred, her voice smooth and calculated. It truly does take a unique kind of ruthless behavior to build a legacy. I am sure your business methods are incredibly revealing. I simply cannot wait to learn exactly how you manage your acquisitions. Patricia let out a shrill laugh, missing the predatory warning hidden in Diane and her words. As the group dispersed, Trey smoothly intercepted Howard near the terrace. I leaned closer to my monitor, recording the audio stream. Howard, I have been meaning to ask your advice on a minor corporate structure issue, Trey said, his tone casual and calibrated to stroke my father and his inflated ego. I am looking at streamlining some foundation vendors. What are your thoughts on utilizing Delaware limited liability companies for operational privacy? I hear they offer incredible anonymity for offshore capital routing. Through the headset, I could hear ice cubes clinking erratically in Howard and his glass as his hand began to tremble. His confident bravado instantly evaporated. Delaware Howard stammered, his breathing suddenly shallow. Well, Trey, that is a specific financial vehicle. I leave those granular details to my accountants. It is not something I discuss at family events. Trey stepped closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial register. I just find the mechanics fascinating. Trey continued relentlessly. For example, moving $500,000 through a registered agent to obscure the final destination. It requires such a lack of basic business ethics, does it not? I mean, the risk of a federal audit exposing the entire offshore structure is massive. A man would have to be incredibly desperate to attempt something so transparently criminal. Do you not agree, Howard? Howard was audibly sweating. He coughed repeatedly, trying to clear the sudden restriction in his throat. Yes, absolutely. He choked out his words, tumbling together in a panicked rush. Desperate. Very risky. Excuse me, Trey, I need to find Patricia. I think the caterers are signaling for us to take our seats. I smiled into the empty room as Howard practically sprinted away. He was terrified, his nervous system flooded with adrenaline, yet he was too deeply entrenched in the fraud to pull the plug. A gentle chime signaled the transition to formal seating. The ambient noise shifted as chairs scraped against marble flooring and the string quartet transitioned into a soft melody. I tracked the audio markers as Trey took his position at the head table, seated directly beside Isabella. The loud clinking of a silver knife against a crystal champagne flute cut through the chatter, bringing the opulent dining room to a complete, expectant silence. It was finally time for the formal toasts. Trey slowly stood up. The microphone captured the rustle of his tuxedo jacket and the collective inhale of the gathered audience. He let the silence stretch for a calculated moment, building anticipation to a breaking point. Family, friends, and esteemed guests. Trey began, his voice projecting warmth, charm, and a lethal undercurrent of finality. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the merging of two families, two distinct legacies, and two very different sets of values. When I met Isabella, I knew immediately she was unique. I knew she was a woman driven by a singular, unyielding focus. I heard Isabella let out a demure sigh, entirely captivated by the performance. Trey raised his glass high, the crystal catching the ambient light. To a bride who knows exactly what she wants and exactly how to take it, Trey announced, his words ringing out clearly across the silent room. Tomorrow everyone will see what you have truly earned. A loud chorus of polite applause and cheering erupted from the guests. Isabella giggled, blushing deeply at what she perceived to be a romantic compliment about her determination and charm. She raised her own glass, drinking the champagne with absolute victorious satisfaction. She truly thought she had secured the ultimate prize. I heard Diane Thornton quietly chuckling to herself again. Diane sat at the edge of the head table, her posture rigid, eyes fixed on the bride. She smirked into her champagne flute, drinking in the exquisite, terrifying irony of her son and his toast. Tomorrow, Isabella was not getting a wedding. She was getting an execution. The morning of the wedding dawned with a crisp, brilliant blue sky over Manhattan. I stood by the tall glass windows of my apartment, watching the city awaken, feeling a profound sense of absolute tranquility. 1,000 miles away in Chicago, the Wilson and Thornton families were undoubtedly in a state of chaotic frenzy. Hair and makeup artists would be swarming Isabella and her suite at the luxury hotel. Patricia would be barking orders at the catering staff, adjusting floral arrangements paid for with stolen money, and ensuring every facet of her fabricated aristocratic image was perfectly polished. Howard would be adjusting his tuxedo, sweating through his collar, hoping his offshore secrets remained safely buried. I took a slow sip of my dark roast coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. I had absolutely no intention of being anywhere near the blast zone when Diane dropped the guillotine. I walked into my bedroom and pulled a single elegant leather overnight bag from the closet. I did not need an extravagant wardrobe for where I was going. I packed a few silk dresses, a linen cover, and my favorite sunglasses. The act of packing was methodical, precise, and wonderfully light. There were no bridesmaid dresses to steam, no uncomfortable heels to force my feet into, and no forced smiles to practice in the mirror. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a calendar alert reminding me of the ceremony start time. I swiped it away, deleting the event entirely. I slipped into a comfortable cashmere travel set, grabbed my passport, and headed down to the lobby where a black car was already waiting to take me to the airport. The ride through the city was smooth, the rhythm of the highway, matching the steady, calculated pace of the trap we had set. Arriving at the private terminal, I bypassed the standard security lines and walked directly into the private lounge. Before I could settle into a leather armchair, I had one final crucial piece of operational logistics to execute. I pulled a sealed, heavy golden box from my tote bag. It was roughly the size of a jewelry case, but its contents carried enough explosive legal weight to decimate my sister and her entire future. A man in a sharp charcoal suit approached me discreetly, flashing the credentials of the specialized secure courier service I had retained. I handed him the golden box. The weight transferred from my hands to his, a physical manifestation of the consequences Isabella had earned. I locked eyes with the courier, ensuring absolute clarity regarding the parameters of the assignment. "The instructions are rigid," I stated, my voice echoing the clinical precision of a forensic audit. "This package must be delivered directly into the hands of the maid of honor, Chloe Evans. It must arrive at exactly 6 this evening, not a minute before, and not a minute after. It goes to the main ballroom of the Chicago Hotel. Do not hand it to the wedding planner, do not leave it at the concierge desk, and under no circumstances do you allow Patricia Wilson to intercept it." The courier nodded, scanning the biometric barcode on the underside of the box before placing it into a locked metallic briefcase chained to his wrist. "Understood, Miss Wilson. Direct delivery to Chloe Evans at exactly 1800 hours." I watched him walk away, carrying the final nail in my family and their proverbial coffin. The trap was no longer in my hands, it was in motion. 20 minutes later, I boarded my first-class flight to Malibu, California. The flight attendant greeted me by name, taking my jacket and offering a warm, genuine smile. I settled into the plush, oversized seat, stretching my legs out fully. As the cabin doors sealed shut and the plane pushed back from the gate, I felt the unmistakable sensation of total liberation. I was leaving the gravitational pull of the Wilson family and their toxic orbit. The plane accelerated down the runway, lifting smoothly into the morning sky, banking west over the Atlantic before turning toward the Pacific coast. The flight attendant returned, hovering respectfully beside my seat. I ordered a mimosa, requesting fresh squeezed orange juice and their finest champagne. When the crystal flute was placed on my tray table, I raised it slightly in a silent, solitary toast. I watched the sprawling landscape of the country shrink beneath me, replaced by a blanket of pristine white clouds. I took a slow sip, the crisp champagne bubbling against my tongue. My mind drifted back to the infamous contract Patricia had drafted months ago, the 8 conditions she demanded I sign to earn the privilege of attending this wedding. I thought specifically of condition number 4, the mandate demanding I hide in the background, remain completely silent, and blend into the wallpaper so I would not cast a shadow over Isabella and her perfection. They wanted me invisible. They needed me to be a quiet, compliant failure to make their success feel real. Now I was flying 30,000 feet above them, wrapped in cashmere, and sipping champagne completely detached from the wreckage they were about to bring upon themselves. I was not hiding in the background. I was operating on an entirely different stratosphere. I had built a life of absolute luxury, intellectual fulfillment, and uncompromising integrity, and I had done it without a single cent of their corrupted money. By the time my flight touched down in Malibu, the sun would be setting over the Pacific Ocean. I would be walking barefoot on the warm sand, listening to the tide. Back in Chicago, at exactly 6 today, a secure courier would walk into the luxury hotel ballroom. He would bypass the floral arches, the ice sculptures, and the string quartet. He would find Chloe Evans standing beside my sister, and he would hand her the golden box containing irrefutable federal documents. The absolute game was officially over forever, right here and now. The morning of the wedding broke over Chicago with a brilliant, deceptive clarity. Inside the penthouse bridal suite at the Ritz-Carlton, the atmosphere was frantic, saturated with the heavy scent of imported white roses and aerosol hairspray. Isabella stood in the center of the opulent room, a vision of fabricated royalty encased in a $30,000 custom silk gown. The dress was a masterpiece of European craftsmanship, featuring a dramatic cathedral train and thousands of hand-stitched pearls that caught the morning light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Patricia fluttered around her daughter like an anxious moth, obsessively smoothing invisible wrinkles and barking sharp directives at the hired photography team. She was determined to curate the perfect narrative for the society pages, demanding specific angles that would highlight the sheer magnitude of the Thornton family wealth they believed they were about to officially acquire. She adjusted the heavy, cascading veil, ensuring it fell perfectly over the handcrafted lace bodice. Patricia adjusted the diamond teardrop earrings Isabella wore, her eyes scanning the suite for any flaw in their presentation. This was the culmination of her life's work. She had successfully engineered her daughter's ascent into the absolute upper echelon of Chicago high society. Patricia smiled at the mirror, viewing her own reflection over Isabella's shoulder, utterly convinced of her own untouchable brilliance. Across the suite, the lead celebrity makeup artist began packing her extensive kit into a heavy leather rolling case. She had been working since 4 in the morning, meticulously airbrushing Isabella to flawless perfection. She cleared her throat, holding up a digital payment terminal. Isabella smiled, her practiced camera-ready smile, signaling for her silk clutch resting on the velvet chaise lounge. She retrieved a sleek black debit card linked to her primary checking account. She tapped the card against the glowing terminal, intending to add a generous, showy tip to demonstrate her new status. The machine beeped a harsh, dissonant sound in the plush room. The screen flashed a bright red error message: declined. Isabella frowned, the flawless facade cracking for a fraction of a second. She tapped the card again, pressing it firmly against the glass. The machine beeped a second time, emitting the exact same sharp warning of failure. The makeup artist shifted her weight uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with the bride. Isabella let out an irritated breath and pulled a platinum credit card from her clutch, one attached to the joint accounts she shared with Trey. She inserted the chip, waiting for the processing circle to spin. The red error message returned instantly. Declined. Contact issuing bank. A cold, sharp spike of adrenaline hit Isabella's chest. The air in the room suddenly felt thin and inadequate. She looked up at her mother, holding the rigid plastic card as if it had suddenly caught fire. Patricia glided over her designer heels, clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. She took the digital terminal from the waiting makeup artist, squinting dismissively at the glowing red text. She let out a short, arrogant laugh, thrusting the machine back into the artist's hands with an air of absolute superiority. "It is just a bank glitch, honey," Patricia said smoothly, waving her hand in the air to dispel the momentary tension. Bank fraud algorithms are so incredibly sensitive these days, especially with all the massive international vendor payments we have been processing for this event. They probably flagged the account for unusual activity. Patricia turned to the makeup artist, pulling a thick wad of cash from her own designer bag. She counted out the tip with exaggerated, aggressive slowness. "There you go. Cash is always preferred anyway." Isabella exhaled, her heartbeat slowing down to a normal rhythm. Of course her mother was right. The sudden volume of high-dollar transactions for the luxury venue, the imported flowers, and the catering would naturally trigger a fraud alert. It was a minor inconvenience, a simple administrative hold that Trey would easily clear up with a single phone call to his private wealth manager. She turned back to the mirror, letting the makeup artist apply one final layer of setting spray. She admired her reflection, pushing the momentary panic completely out of her mind. She was about to become a Thornton. Minor banking glitches were problems for the lower classes. 3 floors down in the groom's executive suite, the environment was entirely different. There was no frantic energy, no loud voices, and no scrambling assistants. The room was perfectly silent, cool, and orderly. Trey sat in a leather wingback chair, nursing a glass of sparkling water. He was entirely alone, having dismissed his groomsmen an hour earlier under the guise of needing a quiet moment for reflection. He was not reflecting. He was waiting. His smartphone resting flat on the glass coffee table vibrated. The screen illuminated the dim room with a stark, bright light. Trey leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the secure message from the senior fraud investigator at his primary financial institution. All destination accounts successfully frozen. Federal warrants are now active. Law enforcement units are in position. Trey read the words twice, letting the absolute finality of the message wash over him. The trap Allison had engineered was completely airtight. Isabella was currently standing in a $30,000 gown, completely bankrupt, and moments away from walking down an aisle into a waiting wall of federal agents. Trey stood up, his movements unhurried and precise. He picked up his finely tailored tuxedo jacket from the back of the sofa and slid his arms into the sleeves. He walked over to the full-length mirror, his reflection showing a man completely in control of his domain. He adjusted his expensive platinum cufflinks, the cold metal cool against his skin. He smoothed the lapels of his jacket, ensuring every line was flawlessly straight. He looked at his own eyes in the glass, letting a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. He was finally ready for a wedding. The main ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton hummed with the collective anticipation of 400 elite guests. Senators, commercial real estate tycoons, and prominent socialites filled the gilded space, their hushed conversations creating a steady vibration of wealth and power beneath massive crystal chandeliers. Waiters in pristine white jackets circled the room with silver trays of vintage champagne, catering to the exacting demands of Chicago high society. They had gathered to witness the merging of 2 prominent families, completely unaware that they were actually seated for a spectacular demolition. Just beyond the velvet-draped doors inside the private bridal antechamber, the atmosphere was thick with suffocating tension disguised as prenuptial excitement. Isabella stood before a towering antique mirror, the $30,000 custom silk gown catching the ambient light. Her reflection was a vision of fabricated royalty, but her posture was unusually rigid. Howard paced the perimeter of the room, incessantly checking his gold watch, a faint sheen of sweat visible on his forehead, despite the aggressive air conditioning. He had spent the entire morning nervously reviewing his offshore account balances, paranoid that Trey might have discovered their massive embezzlement scheme during the rehearsal dinner. Patricia hovered near the door, adjusting her diamond necklace to project absolute aristocratic dominance. She was ensuring every single visual detail flawlessly matched the grand illusion she had spent decades carefully cultivating and polishing. The heavy oak door of the antechamber swung open. It was exactly 6 in the evening. A man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped into the room, effortlessly bypassing the frantic wedding planner and the hovering hotel staff. A locked metallic briefcase was chained to his wrist. He held a heavy gold-wrapped box securely in his right hand. The room fell silent as the courier scanned the faces of the bridal party. He did not ask for the bride. He did not look at my parents. He walked directly toward the woman holding the bouquet of white orchids. Chloe Evans. The courier stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. He held up a digital scanner. I require dual biometric verification for a restricted delivery. Chloe blinked, exchanging a bewildered glance with Isabella before stepping forward. She pressed her thumb to the glowing screen, her hand trembling slightly under the sudden intense scrutiny of the room. The scanner beeped a sharp confirmation. The courier unlatched the heavy chain, detached the golden box, and placed it firmly into Chloe's hands. Without another word, he turned and exited the antechamber, leaving a profound, uneasy silence in his wake. Chloe stared down at the heavy package. A pristine white card was tucked beneath the silk ribbon. She pulled it free, clearing her throat as the videography crew instinctively pivoted their heavy cameras toward her. "It has a tag," Chloe announced, her voice wavering as she read the precise black ink. "A final wedding gift from your sister Allison." Patricia immediately let out a loud theatrical sneer that echoed off the mirrored walls. "Probably some cheap homemade trash to make herself feel relevant since she could not afford our conditions," my mother declared, waving her manicured hand dismissively. Her words were a direct, cruel reference to the 8 impossible mandates she had drafted months ago. Specifically, she was referencing the mandate demanding I hide in the background and cover a massive portion of the floral budget just to secure a seat in the back row. She genuinely believed my absence today was a result of financial inadequacy and social inferiority. She needed to believe I was sitting in my apartment crying over my exclusion, desperately sending a handmade trinket to beg for their forgiveness. It was the only narrative that fed her insatiable ego and validated her cruelty. Isabella stared at the golden box, her perfect smile faltering. The memory of her declined credit cards just an hour earlier flashed in her eyes, a sudden, inexplicable sense of dread settling in her stomach. The brutal red error message on the payment terminal still haunted her. She reached out her fingers, brushing the metallic wrapping. She wanted to throw it in the trash. She wanted to ignore it until the vows were spoken and the Thornton fortune was legally bound to her name. She knew deep down that I did not send cheap trash. She knew my precision. But Patricia saw an opportunity for prime social media content. My mother signaled the lead videographer, directing him to zoom in on the bride. She wanted to capture the stark contrast between Isabella's radiant wealth and my supposed pathetic desperation. She was desperate to embarrass me publicly, aiming to completely humiliate the daughter who dared to defy her iron authority. "Open it right now," Patricia insisted, her voice ringing with malicious glee. She stepped closer, making sure she was perfectly framed in the background. "Let us get her pathetic apology over with before you walk down the aisle. I want everything documented. When she tries to claim she was part of this day, we will have proof of exactly how insignificant her contribution was." Surrounded by her bridesmaids, the blinding lights of the camera crew, and the suffocating pressure of her mother's demands, Isabella had no choice. She swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. Her manicured hands shook slightly as she dug her acrylic nails into the heavy paper. The bright gold foil tore away in jagged strips, revealing a sleek, reinforced steel lockbox underneath. There was a secondary envelope taped to the lid bearing the official seal of the United States Department of Justice. The color completely drained from Isabella's face. Her pulse hammered violently against her ribs as she stared at the chilling insignia. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, praying it was a hallucination. It was not. The federal warrant was real. The consequences were real. With trembling fingers, she ripped off the remaining gold wrapping. The absolute truth was finally exposed. There was absolutely no escape from the incredibly devastating trap. Patricia thrust her hand forward, her manicured nails tapping impatiently against the cold steel of the exposed lockbox. She completely ignored the official federal seal that had just drained all the blood from Isabella and her flawless face. Patricia only saw an obstacle blocking her perfect timeline. She reached past her paralyzed daughter and aggressively flipped the heavy metal latches upward. The lid sprang open with a sharp mechanical click, revealing the interior. There was no cheap homemade trash inside. Resting on a bed of black velvet was a sleek, high-tech digital frame. Its polished glass surface was dark. The moment the bright cinematic lighting from the videography crew hit its ambient sensors, the device instantly woke up. Isabella stared down at the glowing screen, her breath catching painfully in her constricted throat. The frame did not display a nostalgic slideshow of childhood memories or a sentimental montage of sisterly affection. The screen blazed to life with a rapid, inescapable sequence of high-resolution screenshots. The first image was a perfectly scanned copy of the fabricated Lumiere Flora corporate registry. The fake vendor they had used to funnel thousands of stolen dollars was exposed in stunning, perfect visual detail. The camera crew zoomed in instinctively, capturing the exact routing numbers and the fraudulent shell company registration documents listed under a fictitious name. Patricia stepped back, her mouth dropping open in a rare display of genuine shock. The screen automatically transitioned to the next piece of evidence. It displayed the offshore bank accounts Howard had opened in the Cayman Islands, listing the exact dates and the massive sums of embezzled funds transferred out of the family firm. Every forged signature, every manipulated spreadsheet, and every falsified tax document cycled across the digital display in a relentless, damning, continuous, terrible loop. Isabella felt the entire room spinning rapidly around her. Her bridesmaids clustered tightly around the bride, let out synchronized, horrified gasps. The lead videographer, realizing the explosive nature of the drama unfolding before his lens, shifted his angle to capture Isabella and her horrified expression as her curated existence was dismantled pixel by pixel. The visual assault lasted exactly 30 seconds before the digital frame abruptly went black. For one brief, desperate second, Isabella prayed the battery had died. She prayed the terrible nightmare was finally over. But a glowing green audio waveform suddenly materialized across the dark glass screen. The visual evidence was only the prelude to the true destruction that was about to begin. A sharp crackle of static hissed from the device, followed by a crystal-clear audio recording playing at maximum volume. It was the bride and her own voice echoing. The audio was pristine, captured from a secret recording Trey had secured weeks ago when she thought she was completely alone in his luxury apartment, speaking freely on the phone with her mother. "Trey's mom is just a ghetto snob with money," the recorded voice declared, dripping with pure venom and absolute cold dark contempt. There was no trace of the sweet, polished tone she used in public. The recording continued, her voice sharp and vicious. "Once we are married, I will drain that charity dry and divorce him in 2 years." Isabella lunged forward, her hands scrambling frantically over the sleek device. She clawed at the smooth edges, desperately searching for a power button or a volume switch, but the frame had been custom-built and sealed completely shut. There were absolutely no buttons. There was no way to stop the broadcast. Patricia shrieked, lunging alongside her daughter, scratching uselessly against the reinforced glass. The bridesmaids backed away, their faces masks of pure revulsion as they absorbed the sheer malice of the recorded words. But the horror was not confined to the walls of the bridal antechamber. The sound emanating from the digital frame was not coming from its own internal speakers. The voice was impossibly loud, deep and resonant. Isabella felt the heavy bass of the audio vibrating through the soles of her designer heels, shaking the polished hardwood floor beneath her. Trey had not just hidden a recording device in his apartment to collect leverage against her massive ongoing financial bank fraud. He had executed a masterstroke of technological sabotage. Hidden deep inside the golden box was a specialized Bluetooth receiver. Earlier that afternoon, while demanding complete privacy in the groom suite, Trey had covertly synced the hidden receiver directly into the master audio-visual system of the hotel. Beyond the heavy velvet-draped doors of the antechamber, the grand ballroom was packed tightly with 400 of the most influential citizens. Local politicians, commercial real estate tycoons, and elite socialites sat in hushed, reverent silence, waiting for the orchestral music to begin, the processional to officially unite two very prominent rich families. Instead, the massive surround sound speakers suspended from the gilded ceiling roared to life. The vicious, calculating words echoed like thunder across the cavernous ballroom. Every single guest heard Isabella outline her exact plot to steal from her future family. They heard her call the beloved philanthropist a ghetto snob. They heard her cold, premeditated plan to drain the family charity and file for a lucrative divorce. The collective gasp from the 400 attendees was audible even through the thick walls of the antechamber. The groom and his mother, seated in the front row, froze entirely in horrified shock. The true nature of the bride was broadcast to her entire social circle. Inside the antechamber, Isabella realized the absolute magnitude of her unprecedented ruin. The federal warrants were waiting. Her financial crimes were documented on camera forever. Her malicious plot was currently echoing in the ears of every powerful person in the city. The Thornton fortune, her elite social standing, and her personal freedom were instantly vaporized. Her carefully constructed world shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Isabella dropped the heavy digital device. The glass shattered violently against the floorboards. She let out a blood-curdling, absolutely terrified scream. The blood-curdling scream from the bridal antechamber pierced the heavy, suffocating silence that had fallen over the grand ballroom. For 3 agonizing seconds, the 400 elite guests remained entirely frozen in their gilded chairs, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal they had just witnessed. The venomous words of the bride continued to reverberate through the state-of-the-art surround sound system, hanging in the air like toxic smoke. Then the paralysis broke and the room erupted into absolute chaos. A collective gasp of unadulterated horror swept through the crowd, quickly escalating into an uproar of indignant shouting. State senators who just moments ago had been politely sipping vintage champagne now stood up in sheer outrage, their faces flushed red. Powerful business tycoons exchanged disgusted glances, instantly mentally calculating how quickly they could sever all corporate ties with the Wilson family. The high society matrons, women whose approval Patricia had spent her entire adult life desperately courting, openly sneered and pointed toward the antechamber doors. Howard stumbled backward, his face the color of wet ash. The audio recording of his daughter was devastating, but the high-resolution screenshots of his offshore accounts and forged wire transfers currently burning themselves into the retinas of every prominent figure in Chicago were a death sentence. His fabricated financial empire was completely exposed. Panic, sharp and blinding, hijacked his nervous system. He needed to stop the audio. He needed to kill the feed. Howard spun around and launched himself down the center aisle, sprinting frantically toward the elevated audiovisual soundboard positioned at the rear of the grand ballroom. His expensive tuxedo jacket flapped wildly behind him, his heavy footsteps thudding against the imported floral runner. He shoved past bewildered guests and knocked over a towering arrangement of white orchids, sending glass and water shattering across the marble floor. He could see the soundboard glowing with digital levels completely unattended. He stretched out his trembling hands, preparing to rip every cable from its socket. He never made it. 2 men in immaculate black suits materialized from the shadows, stepping smoothly into his path. They were Trey's private security detail, heavily built and utterly immovable. Howard slammed into them like a bird hitting a glass window, bouncing backward and stumbling onto the floor. He scrambled to his feet, his chest heaving, and lunged forward again. The lead security guard did not even blink. He simply reached out, clamped a massive hand onto Howard's shoulder, and shoved him forcefully back into a decorative pillar. The message was brutally clear. The broadcast would continue until Trey allowed it to stop. Back near the entrance of the antechamber, Patricia felt her knees completely buckle. Her legs folded beneath her, sending her crashing down onto the cold, polished marble floor. Her manicured hands flew to her chest, clutching at the heavy diamond necklace as she began to hyperventilate. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt too thin to breathe. She looked up, her wide, terrified eyes sweeping across the sea of faces staring back at her. These were the people she had idolized. These were the elite socialites she had lied to, manipulated, and bankrupted her family to impress. Now they were looking at her with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. The grand illusion was dead. Every fabricated story about their generational wealth, every fake charity donation she had boasted about at country club luncheons, and every lie she had spun to secure Isabella's place in this world had been violently stripped away. Patricia stared into the blinding glare of the crystal chandeliers above the bright light, offering no comfort. She saw the bitter truth she had spent decades avoiding. She had actively engineered her own destruction. When Isabella had shown signs of entitlement and cruelty as a teenager, Patricia had not corrected her. She had rewarded her. When Isabella demanded luxury they could not afford, Patricia had pushed Howard to steel. She had enabled her daughter's worst, most venomous traits, molding her into a perfect heartless weapon designed exclusively to capture the Thornton fortune. She had built a monster, and now that monster had just publicly slaughtered their entire future. The whispers from the crowd intensified, cutting through Patricia like physical blades. She could hear the sharp, mocking laughter of women she had once considered rivals. She could hear the murmurs of financial ruin and federal prison. She curled inward on the marble floor, her expensive designer gown bunching awkwardly around her trembling frame. The society she had sacrificed her soul to join was now actively casting her out, sealing the doors shut behind her. There was no recovery from this level of public execution. Suddenly, the harsh, looping audio of Isabella's voice cut out. The abrupt silence in the ballroom was deafening, heavy with anticipation. The 400 guests stopped murmuring, their attention instantly drawn to the front of the room. Trey emerged from the shadows off stage and walked slowly into the center of the main platform. The spotlight caught him perfectly. He did not look like a man whose heart had just been broken. He did not look angry, humiliated, or betrayed. He looked like a king standing over a conquered territory. His posture was flawless, his tuxedo immaculate, and his expression completely calm and predatory. He surveyed the chaotic ballroom, his eyes sweeping over the disgusted politicians, the furious business leaders, the neutralized Howard pinned against a pillar, and the pathetic, hyperventilating form of Patricia huddled on the floor. Trey exuded an aura of absolute terrifying control. He reached out and tapped the microphone standing on the podium. The sharp, rhythmic thumps echoed crystal clear through the massive speakers, demanding total submission from the room. Trey leaned forward, his voice smooth, resonant, and chillingly composed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began his words, cutting through the lingering tension with surgical precision. "The wedding is officially canceled." He let the statement hang in the air, allowing the finality of the declaration to settle over the crowd. He offered a slow, sharp smile that did not reach his cold eyes. "But please stay in your seats. The real entertainment is waiting in the lobby." The reverberation of Trey's voice over the sound system hung in the cavernous space of the grand ballroom, freezing the 400 elite guests in their gilded chairs. The Chicago high society elite, accustomed to rigid decorum and perfectly curated events, descended into absolute pandemonium. Dignitaries whispered furiously behind their hands while wealthy socialites openly pointed toward the bridal antechamber. The string quartet, previously waiting to play the processional march, hastily packed their expensive instruments and fled the stage. The heavy velvet curtains framing the ballroom entrance violently parted. The massive oak double doors swung open with a resounding crash that silenced the frantic chatter of the crowd. 6 federal agents clad in dark windbreakers bearing the bright yellow lettering of the FBI Financial Crimes Division marched in perfect formation. They were flanked by 4 uniformed officers from the Chicago Police Department. The heavy tread of their tactical boots against the polished marble floor echoed like a steady drumbeat. The sea of politicians, tycoons, and corporate executives instinctively parted, creating a wide, clear path down the center aisle. No one dared speak. No one dared intervene. The agents did not glance at the bewildered crowd or the extravagant floral arches towering above the empty altar. They marched with clinical, devastating purpose directly toward the velvet-draped doors of the private bridal antechamber. Inside the suite, the atmosphere had devolved from suffocating tension into sheer panic. Isabella remained frozen over the shattered remains of the digital frame, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The horrific audio loop of her own vicious words still rang in her ears. Her bridesmaids, the women she had selected to elevate her social standing, were quietly backing out of the room, abandoning her to the wreckage. Patricia was still trembling on the floor, her hands desperately clutching the thick fabric of her designer gown, unable to comprehend the total collapse of her lifelong ambitions. Howard burst through the secondary service door, his tuxedo jacket torn, and his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He had managed to break away from Trey's security detail just long enough to retreat to the antechamber, desperately seeking an escape route. He frantically grabbed his phone, trying to dial his offshore wealth manager, hoping to move the embezzled funds before bank algorithms officially locked him out forever. He never even got the chance to dial the number. The antechamber doors burst open. The lead federal agent stepped into the room, his badge held high, bringing the chilling reality of the federal warrants directly into the opulent space. Howard puffed out his chest, attempting to summon the artificial authority he had wielded over his family and employees for decades. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the approaching agents, his voice rising in an aggressive, desperate shout. He demanded they unhand him immediately, threatening to call the mayor, the police commissioner, and a dozen high-powered defense attorneys. He loudly invoked his fabricated status as a pillar of the Chicago business community, promising to ruin the careers of every law enforcement officer in the room if they dared to lay a hand on his tailored tuxedo. The lead agent did not flinch, slow down, or show a single ounce of intimidation. He stepped forward, grabbed Howard by the shoulders, and forcefully spun him around. Howard let out a pathetic yelp as his face was pressed hard against the antique vanity mirror. The agent yanked Howard's arms behind his back, the sharp click of the steel handcuffs echoing off the glass walls. The agent leaned in close, his voice a deadpan clinical drawl that shattered Howard's remaining delusions. "You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Howard. Your offshore accounts have already been seized." The remaining agents fanned out across the room, securing the perimeter and ensuring no one destroyed any remaining evidence. Two female agents moved directly toward Isabella. The bride stood absolutely paralyzed in the center of the antechamber. Her $30,000 custom silk gown, heavily adorned with thousands of hand-stitched pearls and European lace, suddenly looked like a grotesque, oversized prison uniform. She tried to step backward, her cathedral train catching heavily on the shattered glass of the digital frame, pinning her firmly in place. The agents flanked her instantly. They grabbed her wrists, pulling her arms tightly behind her back. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs snapped shut, the metal biting sharply into her skin, right over the delicate silk sleeves of her lavish gown. The pearls clicked and scraped against the cuffs, a sickening metallic sound that amplified her absolute humiliation. The agents turned her firmly toward the open double doors, preparing to perp-walk the disgraced bride directly through the grand ballroom, forcing her to face the 400 elite guests, who now knew the exact depths of her calculated malicious fraud. Patricia watched the horrifying scene unfold from her pathetic position on the marble floor. Her husband was pinned against the mirror, his face a mask of total defeat. Her perfect engineered daughter was being shoved toward the exit in shackles. The elite society she worshipped was standing just outside the doors, witnessing the absolute annihilation of the Wilson name. The sheer terror of her new reality finally snapped Patricia out of her hyperventilating stupor. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, the heavy diamond necklace swinging wildly around her neck. She looked past the federal agents, her frantic eyes searching the grand ballroom until they locked onto the stage. Trey stood there looking down at the ruined family with an expression of absolute, terrifying serenity. Patricia stretched her shaking hands toward him, her voice cracking into a shrill, desperate scream that sliced through the silence. "Trey, save us! Do something!" Trey looked down at the woman who had tormented my existence, his face completely void of any emotion. He tilted his head slightly, his voice projecting a cold, final victory. "I did do something. I called my future sister-in-law." The heavy oak doors of the antechamber were thrown open. The federal agents marched their 3 prisoners out into the blinding light of the grand ballroom. Isabella stumbled forward, the heavy silk of her $30,000 custom wedding gown, catching under the scuffed tactical boots of the FBI agent escorting her. The cold steel of the handcuffs dug violently into her wrists, forcing her shoulders into an unnatural hunched posture that ruined the regal silhouette she had starved herself to achieve. Howard walked ahead of her, his head bowed in shame, his face a mask of sweating crimson terror as the reality of federal prison finally set in. Patricia brought up the rear of the disgraceful procession, struggling uselessly against the iron grip of a female officer, her diamond necklace askew, and her perfectly coiffed hair falling in frantic strands across her panicked face. The grand ballroom, previously frozen in collective horror, instantly transformed into a chaotic, aggressive theater of digital condemnation. 400 of Chicago's most elite citizens did not avert their eyes or offer murmurs of sympathetic support. Instead, they reached into their tailored suit pockets and designer clutches with highly synchronized speed. A vast sea of glowing smartphones rose high into the chilled air. The harsh, rapid glare of camera flashes and the steady red recording lights illuminated the disgraced Wilson family. The wealthy, powerful tycoons and influential politicians Isabella had desperately tried to impress were now actively documenting her absolute ruin. Angry whispers quickly erupted into loud, uninhibited mocking commentary. A prominent commercial real estate developer openly mocked Howard's ruined, fabricated financial empire. The snobbish high society matrons, who had enthusiastically attended Patricia's exclusive charity luncheons, sneered in utter disgust, deliberately turning their backs as she was paraded past their tables. The absolute rejection was visceral, immediate, and utterly breathtaking. They were being expelled from the upper echelons of polite society in real time, their permanent expulsion broadcast directly to the unforgiving internet. Isabella kept her terrified eyes glued to the imported white floral runner beneath her trembling feet, her hot tears ruining her flawless bridal makeup, leaving dark, pathetic streaks of black mascara running freely down her flushed cheeks. The stern federal agents pushed them steadily forward without an ounce of hesitation, navigating the brutal gauntlet of public judgment with practiced, unfeeling efficiency. They moved swiftly out of the chaotic ballroom and directly into the expansive marble-floored main lobby of the prestigious Ritz-Carlton. The incredibly opulent surroundings filled with towering crystal chandeliers and massive arrangements of white orchids served as a stark mocking contrast to their deep criminal disgrace. The paralyzed hotel staff stood perfectly frozen behind the polished mahogany concierge desks, silently watching the unprecedented spectacle unfold before their very eyes. Just before the revolving glass doors that led directly out into the humid Chicago evening, Diane Thornton stood perfectly composed. She leaned casually against a solid marble pillar, a crystal flute of vintage champagne held elegantly in her manicured right hand. She did not look shocked in the slightest, and she certainly did not look sympathetic. She looked utterly and completely vindicated. As the federal agents marched the shattered, trembling remnants of the Wilson family toward the main exit, Patricia was forcefully guided to walk directly past the woman she had spent agonizing months belittling and insulting. Patricia slowly raised her heavy head, her eyes wide with a desperate, silent plea for a miraculous intervention that would absolutely never come. Diane took a very slow, deliberate sip of her expensive champagne, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch between them for one agonizing, deeply satisfying second. Then, Diane gracefully lowered the crystal glass and leaned slightly forward, her voice a lethal, perfectly pitched whisper that cut straight through the chaotic, overlapping noise of the crowded hotel lobby. "My taste might be urban, Patricia, but at least I am not wearing a federal jumpsuit to a wedding." The razor-sharp words struck Patricia like a devastating physical blow, completely deflating whatever pathetic, lingering remnants of aristocratic pride she still had left inside her soul. Patricia let out a strangled, breathless sob and instantly slumped her trembling shoulders in defeat, allowing the federal officer to shove her through the revolving glass doors and out into the brutal reality of the street. The massive public scandal had moved significantly faster than the authorities. Local and national news outlets had caught wind of the spectacular financial raid within minutes of the FBI breaching the luxury hotel. Frantic push notifications were already hitting the smartphones of every guest in the lobby and thousands of citizens across the entire city. The urgent flashing headlines blazing across digital screens boldly declared the massive bank fraud and the highly dramatic arrest of the prominent Wilson family right at the altar. A massive swarm of aggressive reporters and opportunistic paparazzi had already descended upon the hotel entrance, their massive camera lenses pressed eagerly against the metal barricades set up by the Chicago Police Department. The blinding, disorienting strobe of rapid flash photography violently assaulted Isabella as she was forcefully pushed out of the climate-controlled luxury of the Ritz-Carlton and into the muggy night air. The shouting, frantic reporters hurled vicious pointed questions about embezzled charity funds and hidden offshore accounts, their overlapping voices blending into a deafening roar of absolute public humiliation. Isabella stumbled blindly down the steep concrete steps, completely disoriented and terrified by the flashing lights and the screaming crowd pressing against the barricades. A stern federal agent placed a heavy hand on top of her meticulously styled head, forcing her to duck aggressively, as she was shoved roughly into the cramped plastic-lined back seat of a police cruiser. The heavy reinforced door slammed shut behind her with a sickening, terrifyingly final thud. Her pristine $30,000 custom silk veil caught in the heavy metal frame of the door, ripping violently before dropping down to drag through a filthy, oil-slicked puddle on the dark street. Fast forward exactly 3 days. The suffocating dust had not settled over downtown Chicago. It had mutated into a Category 5 media hurricane. The spectacular implosion of the prestigious Wilson family completely dominated every local news broadcast, financial blog, and society gossip column across the entire eastern seaboard. The sheer velocity of the federal government's actions was absolutely breathtaking. By Tuesday morning, Howard and Patricia had their entire world systematically dismantled. Every single bank account, including the hidden offshore havens in the Cayman Islands, was entirely frozen. Federal agents executed a relentless raid on their sprawling, heavily mortgaged suburban estate. Neighbors who had previously tolerated Patricia and her insufferable country club boasting now openly stood on their manicured lawns, sipping morning coffee, while watching moving trucks haul away seized assets. Antique furniture, luxury vehicles, and designer wardrobes were meticulously cataloged and confiscated to begin paying back the stolen charity funds. Patricia, stripped of her platinum credit cards and her elite memberships, was forced to temporarily relocate to a cheap motel near the interstate, her entire aristocratic illusion permanently eradicated. The legal hammer fell hardest on the golden child. Isabella appeared in federal court on Wednesday morning, trading her $30,000 custom silk wedding gown for a standard-issue drab orange jumpsuit. The visual contrast was incredibly jarring. Her blonde hair, previously styled to absolute perfection, hung limply around her pale, terrified face. The presiding judge, reviewing the overwhelming mountain of digital evidence, the forged wire transfers, the fake corporate registry, and the Cayman routing numbers, showed absolutely no leniency whatsoever. Citing the hidden offshore accounts and her clear access to international funds, the judge explicitly deemed Isabella a severe flight risk. Bail was aggressively and permanently denied. She was remanded directly to federal custody, officially facing up to 15 years in federal prison for multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and grand embezzlement. There would be no luxury honeymoon in the Maldives. Her immediate future consisted entirely of concrete walls, steel bars, and the devastating realization that her own malicious greed had permanently locked the cell door. I watched the brief courtroom sketch of my sister on the evening news from the quiet comfort of my downtown apartment. My living room was peaceful, bathed in the soft, warm glow of a reading lamp. There were no frantic demands, no hysterical screaming, and no impossible mandates dictating my everyday behavior. I poured myself a cup of herbal tea, savoring the profound, uninterrupted silence. For the first time in my 32 years, I was completely free from the toxic, suffocating gravity of the Wilson family. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I had simply held up a mirror to their corruption, and they had shattered their own lives by looking into it. The sharp ringing of my cell phone broke the tranquility. I glanced down at the glowing screen. An automated operator voice announced a collect call originating directly from the Cook County Correctional Facility. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, letting the automated prompt cycle through twice before I finally pressed the button to accept the charges. "Allison!" Howard's voice blasted through the speaker, frantic, breathless. and laced with a pathetic, whimpering desperation I had never heard from him before. The commanding, arrogant patriarch who had constantly belittled my career was completely gone. In his place was a terrified, broken man begging for salvation. "Allison, thank God you answered. You have to help us. They took everything. They took the house, the cars, the accounts. Isabella is terrified. She cannot survive in here. You have to do something right now." I leaned back against my sofa, staring out the window at the glittering city skyline. "I am not sure what you expect me to do, Howard. I am just a background character, remember." "Do not play games right now," he shouted, his voice cracking under the immense pressure of his impending federal indictment. "You are a forensic accountant. You know how these systems work. You know how the feds track this money. You have to look at the filings, find a loophole, find a clerical error, find some way to prove Trey manipulated the data. You are the only one smart enough to untangle this mess. Please, Allison. We are your family." He was begging me to use the exact same skills he had mocked for a decade to save him from the consequences of his own arrogance. It was the ultimate bitter irony. He finally recognized my intelligence, but only when he needed it to shield him from federal prosecution. I let a long, heavy silence stretch across the phone line, allowing him to sit in his dark, terrifying reality. I thought about the 8 impossible mandates Patricia had drafted. I thought about the sheer cruelty of their expectations. I laughed softly, a genuine, unburdened sound that clearly unsettled him. "You gave me 8 conditions to attend the wedding, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any lingering affection. "I only have one condition for you." "What?" he gasped, his desperate hope painfully audible. "Anything. Name it." "Enjoy your new wardrobe." I hit the red button on my screen, instantly severing the connection. I blocked the facility's incoming number, ensuring that Howard, Patricia, and Isabella would never be able to reach me again. The heavy, dark chapter of my life involving my toxic, abusive family was officially and permanently closed. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed with a new text message. I opened the notification. It was from Trey. The message contained a single, high-resolution photograph of an official bank audit report. The highlighted total at the bottom of the financial document confirmed that the charity accounts had been completely restored. Every single dollar they had stolen had been recovered. Beneath the photograph, a brief text message read, "The package was delivered perfectly. All funds recovered. Thank you, partner." I smiled, finally at peace and free. The gentle, rhythmic crash of the Pacific Ocean against the pristine Malibu coastline replaced the chaotic, blaring sirens of Chicago. 3 months had passed since the spectacular implosion of the Wilson family empire. I sat comfortably on the sun-drenched cedar balcony of my newly acquired beachfront property, letting the warm California breeze wash over my face. There were no tears left to shed, no dramatic emotional epiphanies waiting to be uncovered, and absolutely no lingering shadows of guilt. I had simply moved on. The air here smelled of salt and expensive sunscreen, a sharp, refreshing contrast to the suffocating perfume and artificial floral arrangements that had permanently choked my childhood home. I stretched my legs out across the plush outdoor chaise lounge, the brilliant morning sunlight reflecting off the gentle ocean waves. This house was a fortress of peace, purchased entirely with the clean, thoroughly audited bonuses I had earned through relentless hard work and unmatched financial acumen. I did not owe anyone a single dime. I did not owe anyone an apology. I certainly did not owe my blood relatives a second thought. I reached across the glass patio table and flipped open my sleek silver laptop. The screen flared to life, instantly connecting to the secure servers of my Wall Street firm. My inbox was clean, organized, and devoid of any frantic, toxic family demands. At the very top of my priority queue sat an encrypted email directly from the senior managing partners. I clicked the subject line, my eyes scanning the crisp professional text. The high-profile forensic dismantling of Howard Wilson's fraudulent corporate network had not just made local headlines. It had become mandatory reading across the national financial sector. My meticulous auditing, the flawless execution of the asset recovery, and my seamless coordination with federal agencies had become a masterclass in forensic accounting. The partners were not just impressed, they were overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the recovery operation. The text of the email was brief, formal, and devastatingly absolute in its victory. Effective immediately, I was being promoted to junior partner. My compensation package was being tripled, and I was being given complete autonomy to build my own specialized forensic division within the firm. I read the words a second time, letting the profound reality of the achievement settle into my bones. My father had spent 3 decades aggressively telling anyone who would listen that my career choice was a pathetic, low-level clerical joke. Patricia had warned me repeatedly that women who focused on spreadsheets instead of social connections would die miserable and alone. Isabella had laughed at my wardrobe and my work ethic, entirely convinced that true success was something you married into or inherited through calculated manipulation. They had all been completely spectacularly wrong. I had reached the absolute pinnacle of my highly competitive industry without a single ounce of their toxic money, without their elite social connections, and without compromising my own integrity. I had achieved everything they vehemently swore I never would, relying entirely on my own merit, my own intellect, and my own unbreakable will. I proved that blood does not automatically grant someone unquestioned authority over your personal potential. I had meticulously crafted my own exceptional destiny, actively refusing to be bound by the restrictive, suffocating parameters they had aggressively tried to enforce upon my entire existence since childhood. I looked out at the majestic, endless ocean, feeling an incredible surge of pure, unadulterated empowerment washing through my very core. There was a profound clinical satisfaction in knowing the exact current state of my former family. I did not dwell on it, but the cold facts were a pleasant reminder of the universe righting itself. Howard was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, stripped of his tailored suits and his fabricated dignity, desperately trying to negotiate a plea deal that the prosecutors were flatly refusing to offer. Patricia was living in a cramped rented room, entirely shunned by the wealthy socialites she had spent her entire life worshiping, forced to learn how to cook her own meals and wash her own clothes. Isabella was facing the brutal reality of a decade behind bars, her youth and her beauty rapidly fading under the harsh fluorescent lights of a maximum security federal penitentiary. They were rotting in the exact toxic mess they had so arrogantly created, completely powerless to escape the devastating consequences of their own malicious greed. They had blindly assumed that their inherited privilege and fabricated status would permanently shield them from true accountability. Now they were learning the harshest possible lesson about absolute justice. I did not feel sorry for them. They had spent my entire life trying to force me to shrink, demanding I make myself small and invisible so I could neatly fit into the dark, pathetic corners of their perfectly engineered family portrait. They had demanded obedience, silence, and absolute submission to their artificial, aristocratic illusion. Instead of shrinking, I had simply taken a match to their entire existence. I had methodically burned their flawless canvas straight to the ground, leaving nothing but ash and federal indictments in my wake. I reached forward and firmly pressed the screen of my laptop down, the quiet click, signaling the end of my workday. The heavy, dark chapter of the Wilson family was finally permanently closed. I reached across the glass table and picked up my freshly poured margarita, the condensation cool and perfect against my skin. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip, letting the tart citrus flavor wash over my tongue. I leaned back into the plush cushions, closed my eyes, and listened to the rhythmic, eternal crashing of the Pacific waves against the golden California coast. The ultimate sweet revenge was never just about sending my abusers to federal prison, The true victory was sitting right here, living a brilliant, fearless, and utterly unapologetic life, while they slowly vanished into absolutely nothing, completely forgotten now by the rest of the entire world forever.